In this video we're going to look how far we can push Simpler, the sampler in Ableton Live 12, see how far we can push it into the world of granular synthesis. I built a rack, we'll have a listen to some examples, and then I'll show you how the rack functions and what's involved with the rack, and then if you're interested at the end, how to build this rack for yourselves. Okay, let's have a quick listen then. Yeah, so there are of course more sophisticated granular instruments out there, but if you don't have access to things like Granulator 3 or Pigment or whatever, and you have the Simpler, then you can still get a fair bit of fun out of it. We can have a look then at what's actually going on in the rack. Here I've got this loop playing here, Atmos Wave like table. Just a sample from Ableton, and I've dropped it into Simpler. Using this arrow I can open up to get the expanded view of the waveform. Here we have our controls, and I've mapped to it some various parameters. It's really just how you set this thing up, but I've mapped some parameters here. We have control of the sample start, the length of the sample, loop length, sorry, the length of the sample itself. We can adjust pitch if we want to here. Have to wait for a new note to be played down the bottom. Do pitch. I've also got here an arpeggiator built into the rack to create these rhythmical effects. I can change the repeat style of the arpeggiator here, the speed, filter, and the ADSR of Simpler, so that we can make it more snappy, or if we want to, more pad-like. It's the loop length. Turn off the repeat. Then we have an LFO controlling our start position here. When it's set to 50%, it's effectively at the center of the waveform and then loops left and right to the outer extremes. I can control the depth here. If I pull this down to 0, then we just play at the center. As I open this up, we start to rotate around this point here. You can change the rate. Change the depth. Down a little bit. You can also change the shape. Perhaps if I think set it to 84, it goes to random. We will then hop around and choose different portions of this sample to playback. Change the length. Okay, and then we have this X, which introduces a little bit of panning into the sample position and some other functions which I'll go into the build. But anyway, using these controls and setting up Simpler in the right way, we can have a little bit of granular fun. It's pretty good. Adjust the length down. Put this back onto a sine. Slow the rate. These pad-like effects. Adjust the rate for the speed, for the tempo if you like. Okay, I think you can see what's going on. It's quite simple to set up. As I say, we'll look at how the rack is built. Effectively, we just have control of the pitch here, so we can adjust our pitch. We have the arpeggiator here, so that we can introduce these. We take off the release, we take off the attack, the sustain up. Pitch back. You can really get it a bit crazy. Even more crazy if we reduce the sample length and push it to its extremes. A lot of fun to be had with just this one sample for crazy atmospheres and all kinds of things. Okay, and of course you can adjust here at 50%, where, as I say, we're in the center of the sample. If I didn't want to have so much depth, let's say I wanted a smaller range, but I wanted to concentrate in this area of the sample, I can just pull this over. This changes my start position. If you see it stop here, it means your depth is too great and it's going. Let's pull that down a bit, or maybe move the start position. I think you get the idea. Okay, let's have a look at how it's put together. It's not too complicated. It's back to the center. Okay, let's have a look then. So to begin with, you're going to need an instrument rack here. Find that here, instruments, instrument rack, drop it in. I've kept my original labeling here just to speed things up, but you'll be presented with something like this. You then press these plus minus to increase the macro numbers to 16. Then we're going to need some MIDI effects. One is the pitch, then the arpeggiator, drop those in here. Back to instruments for an instance of Simpler. And finally, in the audio effects, we will need the LFO, which we drop just at the end of the rack here. There we go. Okay, so we've got those in. Let's set up Simpler first, and then we'll come back to the others and do the bit of mapping. So some settings we need to make in Simpler. First of all, let's drop a sample in here. There we go, use the one I was previously using. If we click this little arrow here, we can get an expanded view. So what we need to do first is we need to keep it in classic. We will need to set fade to 100%, turn off snap, activate loop. I had the voices set to 8 in my example, and I deactivated retrig. Okay, so that's set up. We can now perhaps do a little bit of mapping. Let's map here the LFO. That might be the first thing we want to map. So what we want to do is go into mapping, and we map here the sample start to our macro here. And then if we go over to our LFO, we need to change this to 100% and map our LFO to control this macro here. Maybe I have to come out of here, 1 second. Map that to control this. Right, now we can reduce the rate a little bit. That's that now controlling our sample start here. You can see the values. Let's just set up the rest of the LFO. We can map this here. The rate to the rates here. The shape we can map here. And finally the depth we can map here. That's all set up now. We don't need to touch that again. In our wavetable, we have some settings we need to map. Actually, we'll set the filter first. I had mine set to the MS2, 12 decibel. We'll set that first and we can do the mapping. So we can map the frequency here, the resonance here. I had this LFO rate here mapped to X. It's mapped here. I also had this pan mapped to X, the filter mapped to X. This is the LFO control. And finally this random pan value here I mapped to X here. Then we have ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, and finally the release here. They're mapped here. We need to map here our sample loop length, which was this value here, the first value. And the length of the sample itself, we'll map that one here to here. Okay, so that should all be set up correctly. We just need to hop out of here and do some settings on the arpeggiator. The distance we will set in a second, but we need to increase the steps to 1 here. Just had 1 step activated. And we will now map the distance to X, the rate to here, and the repeat style, this selection here, will map here. And finally we just need the pitch, which we can map here. Okay, so I think we have everything set up. Okay, so all we need to do now then, we'll just close these up. Drop this down for a second because we need to look at the mappings and make some constraints. I'll make a screenshot of this at the end so that you can use it if you want to build this rack. But there are some constraints here. Oh, there's one more we need to do actually. There's one more mapping we need to do, which is this arpeggiator on-off switch. So we'll map this here. We'll map that to the repeat rate here. And I'll explain why in a second. So let's go here then. The transpose distance I set from 0 to 2. This is on the arpeggiator. Is this distance here. Then we have the random panorama, 25%, just to give us some hint of randomness in the panorama, not too extreme. Also for this one, 25% panorama to LFO. This remains the same. I constrained we've got the LFO rate here. X is apologies, I made a mistake here. This one here, LFO rate, that shouldn't be mapped to X. That's a mistake. Get rid of that. That, which was this value here, this here, should be mapped, sorry, to this rate here. So I have both the LFOs mapped onto this one macro control, the rate for both. That was a mistake, sorry. So here we have the sample start. I restricted a little bit, 99 and 1%, so that we didn't go right off the edges of the sample. Sometimes they weren't very clean, you get glitches and noise. The sample loop length, this one here, sorry, this sample length is actually reduced, 2.54. So that gives us a much smaller loop here. Then we have sustain, that remains the same. Now this value here, repeat rate, here, this is this on off for the arpeggiator. Now what I've done here is I've constrained this to 127, 120. So if we come out of here now, and if I increase the repeat rate up to 1 to 1, then we turn off the arpeggiator. It's just a little trick so that we have a position here that we can turn off the arpeggiator if we don't want it. That's what's happening there. The repeat rate stays the same. This stays the same. The pitch I've constrained to -24 +24. LFO depth we have to adjust here. This is tied to these values here, so you could go with something like 48. I left it at 50, but you could set that to 48. The maths would add up then, but I've left it at 50. The LFO rate here, 0 to 30 Hertz, and for this one here, this LFO rate, the frequency rate from the LFO itself, I've set that to 1.27 Hertz. It doesn't go too fast. Filter resonance I reduced to 90%. Frequency is the same. This remains the same. That remains the same. So okay, so that's everything mapped. As I say, I'll make a screenshot, put this at the end. Let's see, hopefully now if we turn it on, everything should work. See what we've got. Sample start might set to 50. Put this in the center of the sample. And let's see what we have. Now the depth is, so we'll reduce that. Yes, that puts us in the center. So we have the length. Okay, seems to be working. Filter works. Arpeggiator. LFO depth. Just change the shape. So everything seems to be working. That's it. Have a go, have some fun. Thanks for watching as always, and enjoy the rest of your day, and see you in the next video, I guess, hopefully. Take care.